G'day and welcome to Lunch Money, your online and social media home for workouts, special situations and capital raising professionals. My name's Nick Samios. I'm the fund manager and director here at Hermes Capital, and I am your Lunch Money host. Thank you very much for making it along to lunchtime on Mondays. We made the switch from Fridays and we're now fortnightly, and we got plenty of people registering, so it looks like we made the right move. The other day I was talking to an old friend of mine, actually, who is in the transport and logistics and warehousing and supply chain business. And I said to him, "How are things?" And he said, it's supply chain Armageddon. And I said, hang on, just hold everything. That is going to make a great Lunch Money theme, supply chain Armageddon. And so without too much further ado, I'm going to introduce somebody to you who has been working in supply chains, warehouse, logistics and transport across a bunch of industries, agricultural machinery, heavy machinery, and fast-moving consumer goods and tech. But without further ado, let me introduce John Phillips. G'day, John. How are you going?
Pretty good, thanks, Nick. Thanks for the intro. Great to be here.
Yeah, great. And now tell us, you are currently with Kellogg, your national warehouse and logistics.
So I had the logistics team for Kellogg in ANZ, and we're living in very interesting times at the moment.
And so what's the sort of stuff that takes up most of your time of late in that role?
Look, it's from an entire FMCG industry perspective. So none of the issues are Kellogg issues. They're all industry issues. And we really are in a situation where the supply chain at a local level and a global level is probably far more disrupted than it has ever been. You talk to long-time industry professionals in freight forwarding, customs brokerage, sea freight, air freight, road transport. No one has been here before. There's no rule book. It's every day is new territory. And of course, those challenges mean getting things done that would just normally tick over are taking a lot of time and effort. Everybody's investing in tremendous amount of time and effort to basically make things move.
Okay, before we get into that, let me just position you. As I say, you're obviously an industry expert. You're at Case New Holland or CNH, where you're managing, farm equipment, mining equipment, and construction equipment. Now you're also you were at Fuji Xerox, managing tech equipment. So and now at Kellogg's, which is obviously fast-moving consumer goods. So that's. I think I said somewhere 30 years plus, but I didn't want to age us both because we both have known each other for a long time. I think 30 years plus will do. Yeah, I think 30 years plus will do. But do you just want to talk just a little bit to that sort of broad experience?
Supply chain management is essentially the same across industries. It's just the details and the factors and the driving issues vary a bit, but there are some very different underlying opportunities and challenges within different supply chains. And I'll use my most recent tech experience with Fuji Xerox and managing inbound supply chain there versus in an FMCG environment. The value density of the goods. So think about moving a pallet. How much value is in the pallet? How much revenue? How much margin? If it's a very high number, then you've got a lot more options with moving the product than you do in an FMCG or mass merchandise environment where the value is much lower. So your logistics costs as a contributor to your cost of goods sold and your productivity drive very different decisions and very different behaviours and give you different option set in a challenged environment.
Okay, well that's so obviously the nature of the goods. Like everybody buys stuff on eBay, right? And I don't know about you, but we're always looking for the free shipping, right? So everybody wants free shipping. Nobody wants to see those logistics costs. And I want to ask you exactly what is going on. Like, why is it supply chain Armageddon? What does that look like? And how did we get here? And is the whole system so fragile because nobody wants to pay for transport and logistics?
Look, it's a combination of all of those. People ask me, at a rolled up level, what causes the problems that we've got today? The simple answer is COVID. And all of the grief that we've got can, in one way or another, be sheeted back to the impact that the COVID pandemic has had at a global level. What it's created through a pivot in people's purchasing behaviours and the response to manufacturers and suppliers to those behaviours has just created at a global level a congested network of logistics. So around about 20% of the global logistics network's capacity, and I talk specifically here about ability to move containerized freight, so typically manufactured goods, about 20% of that capacity has gone away today because of congestion. So in other words, vessels waiting offshore for extended periods of time before they can get a slot at a terminal to come in and unload, whereas normally they would be able to come in, unload and move on quickly. Terminals congested with vast quantities of container traffic, which means they are far less efficient and take more time to process vessels and to move containers on and off the wharf. That's reflected in road transport networks and rail freight networks as well, particularly the US, particularly in Europe, the UK, where you can see these impacts right across the network. And effectively, if you take 20% of the capacity out of the system, you're going to have problems. And that's,
so 20% is out of the system because it's sitting in congestion. It's
sitting,
blocked up,
waiting. Yep.
Yeah. So that's so then, again, as I said before, presumably the whole supply chain, transport and logistics is extremely finely tuned. And so it wouldn't have taken much to upset in the first place. I've got a graphic here of the ship that got jammed in the Suez Canal. That seemed to be in one image, it just came at the worst possible time. I do remember, before, as COVID was happening in Asia, but before really the reality of it dawned on us, we had 3PL, third-party logistics clients, and their revenue just plummeted. And it always drops at Chinese New Year time anyway.
Yes.
But then all of a sudden, Chinese New Year was extended, remember? And then, is it that blockage that just hasn't unblocked, or actually we've got another graphic actually I'd like to talk to you. The one that demonstrate, it's got the pictures of the ships, the visual capitalists. Yeah. So just talk us through that. That sort of visually represents what's going on, I suppose.
Look, that's a pretty good representation of what's happening in the Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach at the moment, and that's a great temperature check of global congestion. But you're right, the Chinese New Year in 2020, typically China shuts down a big slice of its manufacturing capacity, and COVID hit at the worst possible time. The startup basically didn't happen, and people across the globe weren't necessarily too concerned about that, because as COVID hit, there was a lot of expectation that expenditure would diminish. So the expectation was that we need to take volume out of the logistics system, manage capacity in order to weather a storm of a huge expected downturn. And of course, what happened was that a lot of government expenditure, a lot of stimulus money went into economies around the world. A lot of people retained their jobs and were unable to spend money on experiences, on going out, on travel, on theatre, and a lot of that expenditure then pivoted to purchase of physical goods, and that's everything from PlayStations and toy drones to housing renovations, new vehicles. And
that's a great insight. So what you're saying is, so around the world, particularly, people are all this stimulus money, and as you say, they couldn't spend it on travel so they just bought stuff.
Demand just came roaring back at a rate that no one predicted at any level, and a lot of the production capacity, or not even for finished goods, but underlying production capacity for components, had been turned off or slowed down as part of when the pandemic hit in the first part of 2020, and turning it back on, ramping it back up That's not something you can do very quickly or easily, but it was done, and the global logistics network just didn't have the spare capacity to take that huge surge in volume and deliver it in a normal time frame.
Okay, I think it's just worth going back to that graphic, the visual capitalist graphic, for a moment. I mean, you were saying earlier that you thought that this is a pretty good demonstration. You can see this is a graphic of the congestion at the Port of Los Angeles.
Yeah.
There's a great big block there that says there's 540,000 containers waiting in the harbour at the Port of Los Angeles. So there's 540,000. And for those watching at home, you can see that there's sort of a ghosted bit on the top there. There's 29,000 containers arrive each day. So in September, 29,000 containers arrive each day, but they're only processing 18,000 containers a day, is the way I'm interpreting that graphic.
Yeah, and Nick, that's a great example of the challenge. Port Los Angeles and Long Beach is the major US port. It's the gateway into the US from product from Asia. And the challenges there are it's just a great example. So the number of vessels waiting offshore and the amount of time that they've been waiting has been extending month on month for certainly the last 4 or 5 months. The volumes that they've been processing and actually moving through the terminal have been increasing month on month, and they've been setting records month on month. So it's not like they're not trying.
Right.
It's just they haven't been able to keep up with that volume. And it's not just a case of unloading the ships. You've then got to move the containers off the wharf and out of the port precinct into the inland rail network and the inland road network. And that is heavily congested as well. So that has been slowed up to the extent that the Biden government is now actually looking to take some executive action around legislative measures, punitive measures, incentives, including a $1 trillion package directed at supply chain and logistics infrastructure as a response to the issues that it's seeing.
I mean, I wonder if the government can solve these sorts of problems. You're talking about opening up the port 24 hours. I can't believe it wasn't operating 24 hours anyway. I'm sure there's good reasons for that. But I can understand then how things are getting blocked up at the port. I mean, why are they getting blocked up on the roads and rails downstream from that?
Look, quite simply, the capacity to move product off the port is dictated by the capacity of the road network and the rail network. You can only move so much at capacity for so long before that becomes congested as well. So the US, there's a wide range of manufacturing and distribution networks right across the country. And when they are at capacity, when they're full of containers, they haven't got space to put stuff into warehouses. And part of the American problem is that they're a big exporter as well. So production from various places within the US, they're struggling to get containers available and get capacity to move those containers back out of the country and export them. And some of that's been driven by the fact that pushing all of these containers into the US and Europe has meant a shortage of containers in Asia. And shipping lines have been incentivized to move their empty containers back, because that means they can get more product put in there and charge what are absolutely record-setting rates. And that's been one of the results of the congestion and the challenge, is that rates are now at record levels. And there are some eye-watering numbers out there on the profits that shipping lines are making currently and will make into 2022 and probably into 2023. And it's all on the back of service levels that are actually at record lows. So schedule integrity, arrival on time is at record lows. Dwell times are at record levels. It really is a huge challenge.
All right. Well, okay. So that's sort of going to feed into a query that I have about. I want to talk about inflation in a little bit. I know neither of us are economists, but there are, as far as I see, there's at least 3 factors that we can talk about. But before we get to that, can you actually? I'll just ask our producer if she managed to find a graphic on those CHEP pallets. You raised with me earlier that CHEP pallets, you wouldn't be able to get hold of them for love or money. So there's a graphic here. Australian retailers are hoarding shipping pallets ahead of Christmas. So tell me, what is going on with pallets?
Oh, look, Nick, the retail network relies entirely on product being distributed on the Australian standard pallet, and it's unique to Australia. One specification, it only applies in Australia. And part of the response of the supply chain disruption is that many suppliers, particularly those bringing product in from overseas, have increased their safety stocks in order to be able to guarantee supply with a very disrupted inbound supply chain. Many, particularly players in the mass merchandise area who import their product, have committed to import months and months, in some cases 12 or 18-month lead times. They've had product coming in, which has got to be unloaded from containers. They've put it on pallets, but they haven't had the sales that they would normally have because of the lockdowns. So there are warehouses throughout the country which are full of product, and they're all sitting on pieces of wood,
Right.
the Australian standard pallet. And that spike has increased at such a high level that pallets are now in very scarce. They're in very short supply, and they're having impacts across the industry with respect to big manufacturers being able to manufacture. If you've got a factory and you can't get pallets to put your finished goods on, then you've got to stop production. And that's impacted a lot of businesses throughout the country.
Now, look, you're doing something there that I'm doing, and we're clicking our pens, and I think we've got to stop doing that. So
We'll do that.
I'm gonna try and stop clicking mine. Now, just getting back to those pallets, I had a client years ago who used to refurbish pallets, and he used to. So he'd get busted pallets would come into his yard every day. And somehow they'd end up going to the prison somewhere, Silverwater or somewhere, and these things would get But he used to say that he would have nightmares. He had so many of these things coming into his factory every day that if he didn't clear them out and get them fixed, the next day they'd dump them more in. And I think he had nightmares of being drowned in busted pallets. But okay, that's fascinating that for a want of pallets, you can have manufacturing seized up.
Yeah, look, that's absolutely the case, and I think it's a great example of a risk hiding in plain sight that I think very few manufacturers or distributors had really given thought or consideration to throughout the most of this year, and the constraints have really been felt over the past 3 or 4 months as we ramp up to Christmas. And of course, the volume of product going through the Australian retail network goes up. So the requirement for pieces of wood to put all that product on goes up. And that's when the impact's been felt.
Okay. Now, do you mind if we just touch on, I mean, I guess you've arguably, in your sort of career, you've got 3 different industries that we might just touch on. With the heavy machinery, so you said ag equipment, mining equipment, construction equipment. I know, in our business, we deal a lot with mining services, and we've got some clients in ag, and certainly in construction as well. And the price for used stuff has just gone through the roof. Yellow goods, anything, everything. The price has gone through the roof. And of course, I think we've got a news article there about car sales in Australia. Actually, I mean, the sales are actually falling behind because they can't move this stuff. But what is there anything in particular that you can talk to in that sector, stuff on wheels?
Oh, look, the stuff on wheels thing, I think in the commercial sector, what we do know with our service providers and just throughout the industry, particularly on the road freight side, is that all of this demand is driving demand for transport services. Trailer sets are in very high demand, and there is effectively zero availability. The local manufacturers who produce trailer sets, and incidentally, we produce some of the best trailer sets in the world, are looking at 6 to 12 to 18-month lead times, depending upon the type of trailer set that people are asking for. The rental companies, the hire companies are essentially got no equipment available. It's all out on hire. Prime movers, again, in very short supply, orders being placed now. We'll talking with some of our service providers earlier, are talking about 2023 delivery.
Wow.
So it's that level
For
of
prime
constraint
movers.
for prime movers.
Wow.
And again, it depends on spec, but that's having an impact in the used market as well. So there's a lot of equipment that is being auctioned at rates that were unheard of a relatively short time ago. On the passenger vehicle side, one of the big constraints has been production constraints from overseas. And a lot of that has been driven not by a logistics ability to move them, and all those vehicles effectively sit on a different logistics supply chain, but at source, at manufacture, with a shortage of microchips. And so part of the pandemic has seen a spike in demand for microchips. And on the supply side, there are very few players in the market. And one in particular, there was a fire, I think in March or April this year in Japan, which effectively took out something like 20 or 30% of supply for microchips from the whole of industry. And that obviously has a huge knock-on effect with vehicle manufacturing, along with consumer electronics and a whole range of things. That might be why your iPhone 13's taken a while to get here.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, we'll segue into tech in a moment, but it is interesting. If you have got to either wait until 2023 for a prime mover, I appreciate it's not all prime movers, it's a particular spec,
Yeah.
but you're going to go to the second-hand market, and that's why we're seeing these insane prices for used vehicles of all description. So just going on to tech. So what about tech? Yeah, I said to you the other day, I've ordered a new iPhone 13, and I'm not sure I'll actually get it before they launch the iPhone 14. It's indefinite. They've gotten. I don't have a time for when that's going to turn up. So are there any sort of special, well, you mentioned chips and what have you. Is there anything else specially affecting tech?
Look, I think the majority of the tech impact is around chip supply, and a spike in demand for a vast range of products and constrained chip supply means that manufacturers are pivoting limited supply towards product that obviously gives them the most revenue and margin, which means a lot of lower end product becomes really constrained in supply. It's not so much, I think, a logistics function. Once the tech product is manufactured, there's usually enough value in the product for it to be air freighted, and there is air freight capacity. You can move a lot of stuff around and expedite the movement, but it's really a production constraint, and that's probably not going to go away in a hurry. Expanding chip supply is not something that can be done quickly and easily. And quite apart from any COVID and pandemic impact, or even impact from the fire in Japan, there has been a significant growth in demand for microchips in any event. More and more vehicles use more and more microchips and sensors and so forth. Consumer electronics invariably use more. Each new generation of phone, each new generation of cameras, each new generation of tablets and laptops, etc. They're always more sophisticated. They've always got more capability, and that means demand for chips is going up, quite regardless of the impact of the pandemic. So you've got the double whammy from a supply side with the impact of the pandemic.
Okay. Now, what about FMCGs? What sort of special challenges are they facing?
Oh, look, the FMCG challenge is the product, I think, tends to be less susceptible to huge variations in demand by its very nature, but supply constraint with respect to transport is the big piece. And transport, the cost of transport has gone up exponentially certainly over the past year. The price of moving a container at a global level, and it doesn't matter which shipping lane, where you're moving a container from, there has been significant unprecedented impacts in the cost of moving containers. A container that might have been $2,000 18 months ago, if you've got it on a contract rate, if you can get a contract and get a shipping line to honour the contracts with capacity and service, you're probably looking at $5,000 or $6,000 relatively. And in many cases, you're going to have to go to the spot market to move a container, and that might be $10,000 or $12,000 or $14,000.
Is that do you watch the Baltic Dry Index? Is that's all that stuff, isn't it?
Yeah. So look, there's a lot of indexes. There's a lot of indexes out there, and they're all indicating one thing, and that is huge cost increases. And a big slice of that, it produces some interesting outcomes, and there's some tremendous winners in all of this. The shipping lines this year are on track to make in excess of $200 billion in profit. Right. The container shipping lines. That's more profit than the entire industry will have made in all of the 21st century to date. Wow. It really is. It's phenomenal.
So just quote that stat again.
Shipping lines on track to make $200 billion or north of $200 billion in profit in 2021. That's more profit than the entire industry has made in the 21st century.
Just amazing. Just amazing.
It really is.
All right. Now, before we get to how the government proposes to remedy or suggests that these supply chain issues can be remedied, you mentioned a bit earlier about Australia's place in the global supply chain. Can you just touch on that?
Yeah, look, Nick, at a very high level, we participate in three supply chains. One of them we're a monster in, we're a big player, and two of them we're effectively rounding. And of course, the supply chain that we're a monster in is commodities, bulk commodities. Australia's a big player, huge supplier of coal and iron ore. And we have a bit of a market maker in terms of the logistics of that, as well as the commodities themselves. And of course, they run on their own supply chain, essentially away from manufactured goods. The second supply chain where we're rounding is essentially vehicles. So anything with a vehicle on it, anything with wheels on it that can be driven on or off a ship, sits in its own supply chain. But again, we're a very small market. 1 million vehicles a year isn't many in a global scheme, and containerized freight, which some smaller volumes of commodities travel, but basically manufactured goods. We are a bit player into our region. Global containerized freight, we would represent somewhere between 1.5% and 2% of total global volumes. We really are rounding. We're at a geographic disadvantage. We're on the way to nowhere. So shipping lines have got to commit to come to Australia and New Zealand. In order to come to Australia and New Zealand, we're not sitting on the threshold of a major supply chain between two global nodes. So that in itself is, adds a further challenge. And we've seen some reduction in services. Port Botany, where we've seen a reduction in the number of vessel visits year on year over the past few years. And that's just an example of one of the risks and constraints that Australia as a trading nation has. There's some exposure there around our access to services and the flexibility of bringing product in, and of course has an impact on our ability to export as well.
All right. Now, look, let's thanks for that. Okay, well, let's just have a quick look then at the Productivity Commission interim report, Vulnerable Supply Chains. This was the Australian Productivity Commission. Just before we get to that, I will remind live viewers that you can pop a question in the chat function there, whether you're watching on LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube or Twitter for that matter. You can pop a question to John while we're live, and we've got some prizes for you. What do we get? If you are the best question, if we get a question, gets a book by Mike House. Actually, they get 2 books by Mike House. All right. Okay, let's go back to the Productivity Commission report. And they made some suggestions as to, well, firstly, let's have a look at a couple of the graphics in that report that illustrate the size of the supply chain. There's a graphic there showing us where our imports come from. China is no great surprise. The next graph shows us what we are importing And as you can see, vehicles, heavy machinery, electrical equipment, some of the things that we have been talking about. And then the Productivity Commission has these suggestions. We've got a question here from Chris George. I've heard from a client that some shipping companies that usually have a ship every 1.5 days are currently docking one every 7 days concurrently, one for every 7 days concurrently. Thanks for that observation, Chris. John?
Look, Chris, a good question. And I think a lot of that is an example of what's happening for a lot of players in the industry. The shipping lines, the disruption to their schedules, sailings are being blanked. In other words, a scheduled sailing doesn't occur. Ports are being omitted within a loop because of a delay in an individual port, and they need to get back on schedule. And I think that's the sort of the results that you're seeing, and we're seeing that across the world, and certainly at a local level, and across Trans-Tasman, coastal shipping within Australia. You get vessel bunching. It's a heavily disrupted schedule, and what was a high degree of reliability, around 80% reliability on schedule reliability, is now probably closer to 20%.
Well, what did you call it? Shipping bunching, schedule bunching? What was that?
Yeah. So it's if there's a weekly service, you would expect to have one ship per week. What you're seeing now is that you might see 3 weeks without a vessel, and then 3 vessels in 1 week.
Right, like when all the buses come at once. But I mean, if it's gone from 1.5 days to 7 days, I mean that's a factor of 4, which is quite incredible. Thanks for that observation, Chris. So Chris has got a further observation. Also, ports being missed, e.g. Sydney, and then unloaded in Melbourne, and then the road freighter to Sydney. Well, that's going to impact on the costs.
Oh, look, that's absolutely happening, and the frustrating thing is that the shippers who have got the cargo in those containers, you've got no say in that. And often get very little notice of that. So,
and then you just get tagged with the bill.
Pretty much, yes. Yeah.
Okay. So just going back to
the shipping lines, Nick.
Right. Okay. So then just going back, we've got this Productivity Commission gave some suggestions as to how people can manage their supply chain issues. They've got prevention, reducing the likelihood of disruption, preparedness, prepare the rest of the supply chain to mitigate the costs of disruption, response, improve the speed and effectiveness of the firm's response, and recover from the situation. And now the first thing, prevention, they're saying, spread your location of factories, choose suppliers that are less vulnerable, invest in risk management. Now that might be something that you could prevent issues in 5 years' time, but you're not going to solve the problems today, are you?
Yeah, look, I think, Nick, it's probably fair to say that for most of these measures listed here, both in terms of prevention, preparedness, response, a lot of them are long-term measures. And in the Australian environment, a lot of them are a whole lot easier said than done. I think at a global level, we are a big market in terms of manufacturing in particular. And manufacturing at scale or sourcing at scale is required in order to be able to get a low unit cost, and moving those, having multiple suppliers means if you have one supplier and you split it to 2, you're sort of halving your order quantities, you're doubling your admin cost. So maintaining cost across a lot of those strategies is a challenge. And doing it quickly and maintaining it in the long term is a challenge as well. I think in the
let's have a look at just that graphic again. So you were just about to say under the mitigation.
Well, so yeah, I think the easiest one, and I believe that the one that has been most commonly adopted, is the preparedness piece, the holding of additional buffer stock.
Yeah, so just talk us through that. So we were talking a bit earlier. You were saying that people have been rushing to fill up their warehouses with buffer stock.
Yeah. So if your supply chain is disrupted and your availability of your product becomes, the certainty of availability reduces, but you've still got to supply your customers, then one of the first responses is to increase your safety stock, increase your buffer stock. And across, I think, FMCG, across mass merchandise. That's one of the measures that has occurred at an industry level throughout the course of 2021, and is one of the drivers to the current pallet shortage, in that there's a whole lot more product sitting in warehouses in Australia on pieces of wood than traditionally have been at this point in time, and certainly far more than anybody had forecast.
Well, there seems to be vicious circles in all of this. But actually, if we just go back to that graphic, because I want to talk about some more points there. So building up buffer stock, as you said, for a start, it's taking pallets, for example, out of the system, and then that just creates more problems. It makes things worse, and it becomes like I say, a vicious circle. And the other thing, of course, is there are holding costs. Of course, when you warehouse stuff, you've got
there's direct holding costs. You're investing in inventory. Depending upon the nature of your product, you're facing increased obsolescence risk and potential disposal. You've got a whole range of costs there, both direct and indirect, that are a driver of doing that. But there's not a lot of option otherwise.
Yeah. Now, it also talks about have flexible manufacturing processes, but I just wonder, well, and I'm sure that's wonderful, of course, but I just wonder whether or not, the Kanban system and just in time and all of these all of these systems that look at taking costs out of manufacturing and taking costs out of logistics are what's made everything so vulnerable in the first place.
Oh, look, a chunk of those systems have contributed to the vulnerability. There's no doubt about that. Interestingly, Toyota, who are the originators of the Kanban system of just in time, a lot of that has been adopted, but probably not in an effective way by many manufacturers across the globe, in that they've made everything just in time. Part of Toyota's piece was that you absolutely do just in time on all non-critical pieces, but you do try and have some contingencies around pieces that are absolutely critical. And that was reflected, I believe, in the course of this year, where chip supply, Toyota had identified as being a key critical component. So they had more buffer stock and took longer to be as adversely impacted as many other auto manufacturers because of their approach.
Thank you very much, John. Well, just by way of wrapping up then, when is this all going to end? When are we going to get back to normal?
I think, Nick, that's the $64,000 question that everybody's asking. It's certainly going to be well into 2022 before there's any sort of normalisation. Expectation is that the underlying cost drivers for sea freight, which is really driving all of the cost increase, is going to extend probably out towards the end of 2022 and well into 2023. I would suggest that it's probably going to be in the latter part of 2023 before any real sort of normalisation, certainly with respect to underlying rates, is achieved. I would expect the congestion to be reduced somewhat before then, probably mid to late 2022. But there's a lot of experts made a lot of prognostications over these issues over the past 12 months or so, and we've all got it wrong. So that's an educated guess, but it is a guess.
So vehicle prices, the price of a new car is not going to come down. Prices of used car, used equipment, etc., well into next year is what you're saying.
Yeah, I think the underlying drivers around all of that are going to stay the same. They're not going to go away in a hurry. I think on the ocean freight side, which has really been the leader or the driver of logistics costs, I think we've seen peak. We've started to see a little bit of heat come out of the spot rate market, but we're talking, very small numbers in terms of reducing. The rates don't appear to be going up. What will be the next 4 to 5 months will be telling as we get to the other side of Chinese New Year. And if we assume a normal Chinese New Year, a shutdown and then a ramp up after the 2-week holiday, which normally takes some time to flow through the logistics network, I think probably by Easter time we'll have a much better view as to what happens.
We'll wrap it up. We look forward to seeing you all again soon. John, I'd like to say thank you very, very much for sharing your expertise in the industry. Obviously, that expertise goes very deep, and you've got a lot of technical knowledge there that I'm sure we've only touched on the surface of. But thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for our viewers. Thank you to our podcast listeners and those of you watching us later on YouTube. See you next time. Cheers.
Thanks, Nick. Great to be with you.
Cheers, mate.